Welcome to another episode of Boosted Rolls, a War Machine and Hordes podcast focused on EU meta, tournaments, and tactics. My name is Tomas, and I play Circle.
Hi guys, I'm Simon, and I'm going to be doing some Twitch streaming starting on October 14th. More details to come. So, today we are talking about our WTC experience. This episode will be following myself and Tomas, or however the hell you want to say it. I'm going to stick with Tomas, and our sort of journeys through this year's WTC, representing England Lions and Poland South. Tomas is the captain, and I was just one of the players. So yeah, what are your feelings? How are you feeling at the minute?
I'd like to say I'm good, but really I have the same feeling I had after previous WTC. It's such a great experience that when you come back and you get hit by reality, you get all depressed. How about you?
Very much, maybe even more in the same place. So I know that a lot of people have been sort of posting on various social media their sort of write-up of the WTC, you know, hey guys, I've just got home and, you know, these are my thoughts and feelings. And obviously it's been a real pleasure to read those and to see that everyone had such a great time. But I must say that, like, I get this feeling that I'm not done with it yet. So I haven't felt like I wanted to write up my sort of feelings on it or experiences from it, because I don't feel like the story's finished yet, but it definitely is. You know, I've been home for several days, and so yeah, I sort of feel, you know, a bit stuck, as you say, and I found that I really don't care about much else that's going on. I was saying to this before the cast, but like I turned up to work and I just couldn't care less, which is a bit of a shame. But you know, that's just because the WTC was such a high, that it was so much fun, that it was such an intensive week and weekend, that it does always leave you feeling a little bit low afterwards. So yeah, here we are. And you know, as I said, it is really as a result of it being so amazing. At least that was my, you know, I'm almost certain you were the same.
Yeah, I would say that WTC every year, it takes a lot of pressure and a lot of practice and a lot of time involved to get the best out of your games, to be the best player you can be, to be the best with your pairing, faction, tactics, strategies, whatever. And then I go to WTC and I quickly realized that those games, I want to play them just to play them, but really I am there for the people, for the experience, for the social aspect of it. And those games are just nice addition to have something to talk about.
Yeah, they provide the stories that we spend hours repeating with each other. Yeah,
exactly.
No, I couldn't agree more. Although I must say that I do feel like those games are particularly special because you've spent so long preparing for them. But as you say, that does bring a lot of pressure as well. So what we've agreed to do for this episode is, as many of you will know from our Facebook page, we are also interviewing the winners of the tournament, so Norway Munin, and we're in the process of doing the interviews with as many of those players as we can get our hands on. Of course, that takes a bit of time, and so please, you know, bear with us if this episode comes out first. We are working on it, and Tomas is working hard on the editing, and it does take a lot of time. You know, when we've just come back from the WTC as well. So we're doing what we can, and we'll get them out to you. But during that process, we did find ourselves sort of repeating a few questions to each player, and those questions seem to lead to some interesting answers. So in our episode, we feel like it's probably a good idea to sort of maybe answer them ourselves. So I'm going to repeat a few of those questions, and then we'll both sort of just give our take on it. So I'll start with the sort of last year, 1 year ago. Yeah. Were you, still playing the same faction? What team were you on? How was your life looking 1 year ago at last year's WTC?
So the previous WTC was actually my first WTC ever. I started playing the game not that long before it. I think I had like year and a half to prepare myself, to prove myself as a player, and to get practice with the pair I was bringing. I must say I was very nervous before the first WTC. I was a new player, so I really wanted to prove everyone that I'm a good pick for the team. I did my best, and I've spent a lot of time on this game just to get the best results I could possibly get.
Mm-hmm.
Our team captain at the time was Marcin Majsek, and he did a great job just motivating me and explaining me how WTC works and what would be my role in the team. Our selection process at the time was regional.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, it was the first year they did that, and I understand the pros and cons behind it.
For the benefit of the listeners, what are the pros and cons of that?
So I think the main pros of that is just that you get to know each other very well. You play in the same meta, you see each other's games, you know what are the results of these games, and I think it's very important for the captain, so he knows how you rate the matchups, what matchups did you play or what matchups did you not play. He sees you often during the gaming nights, gaming practice together, so he knows how you play into things you don't know, how you play into things you have practice with, how you approach the game when you have a bad matchup, when you have a good matchup. All those things really matter in terms of just making decision during matchup process for your captain. And I think it's very important he and you, everyone within the team know each other, so you can trust each other.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The downside of it is just you pick a region which in terms of Poland is not that big, so you're missing out on the 5 best players in the country. You just get the best players you have in this region, so that's probably the main downside of it.
Okay. Which do you prefer? You know, having mentioned those upsides and downsides, would you still like? I know that you are becoming involved in the sort of committee aspect of things. Are you going to be pushing to continue that tradition of regionalized teams, or are you going to be looking to do an all-star team?
So if you are speaking about the past, after my first WTC, I was indeed involved in a selection process. So I was the committee for Poland South, together with Mateusz from Moments of Clarity, who was responsible for Poland Centrum, and Marcin Nowicki from Warren PL, that was responsible for Poland West. So we were looking to repeat the same system because we were quite happy about it. Poland South went to the finals and we lost 2-3 to Australia in a very close game. And Poland Centrum also felt like they did not suffer from this system. They didn't perform at their best, but they definitely felt like they were strong enough to fight for the podium.
Yeah. Okay. And so you went in as a player under Marcin last year. And what casters did you take, and how did you do?
So I took the infamous double Bones of Ouroboros pairing with Kruger 2 and Bradigus, which in North America had a reputation of maybe not being strong enough or not versatile enough. But in Europe, it was considered one of the strongest pairings in the meta at the time. And I did very well. I lost only one game in quarterfinals to Jake Van Meter. It was third tiebreaker, points killed, so a very close game. And other than that, I won all my games. And as I said, we went up to the finals, so they weren't really any easy games.
Right. Okay. And what was your player composition last year compared to this year? Were there any changes?
So I'll start by saying that Poland South is a very big meta with a lot of strong players. So the competition level here is really high, like really high.
Okay.
So because we did really well last year, some players that often play against us got a kind of boost to their confidence that they can make it to WTC team, because some of those players win against those that were in the team. So I think the competition was even higher than the previous year, and it didn't make my job any easier. I had to pick between a lot of strong players, and the further year progressed, the more it was choice between maybe not who's better, but who's playing stronger faction, or who's just devoting more time into playing the game or travel to tournaments more.
Okay.
In the end, I think I had like choice between 7 or 8 players, but shortly before the deadline, one of our players decided to drop out from the competition for reasons. It was Krzysztof Hawryszczuk from, he was a member of WTC team last year. So it made maybe my choice a bit easier. I've picked another player just based on the faction he was playing. He was playing Grimkins, but he got some offer to go to Canada during the WTC time, something like that. So he had to drop out. And that was a bit of an issue. So I've picked another player who was our alternate at the time, Michał, who was playing Legion. But Michał said that during summertime, he's not going to have enough time to get enough practice with his pair to be confident going into WTC. So that was a bit of an issue, but it happens that my very close friend was very excited about this WTC spot. He's playing Grimkins, and he's working very close to the place I live, so he could come by very often and get some games in and get practice to become, air quotes, WTC level player.
Sure. I mean, I've met the guy a few times, and his spirit is most definitely WTC level. Lovely guy, completely clean play, competitive, driven to improve. So he had all the traits that you need to take to WTC. He just didn't have the games and the practice, right? So that's what you basically tried to help him to get.
Exactly. I think he might have, but I feel like I was more strict towards him in my judgment compared to the others, because he's my friend. So I didn't want anyone to tell me that I take someone just for being my friend. I wanted it to look fair. So I was more demanding versus him than versus the rest of the field. So eventually we had no choice. We needed to take him because there was no other alternative as good as he is in our area. So I was really happy that he's on my team, and I was really happy and honored to get so many practice games with him. And also because of that, we had already a strategy. I've played let's say 50 games into Grimkins because of that. So because of that, our strategy was to get me into Grimkins because I was so practiced into the matchup. So, yeah.
That's really interesting. I'm interested because, I think a lot of Circle players want to avoid Grimkin. And yet that was the matchup that you found yourself, just through sheer comfort wanting to take, right?
Oh, it's hard to say, honestly, because if this was the case, Tomek would be as happy to take Circle as I was to take Grimkins, but it definitely wasn't the case. I think it's because Kruger's skill ceiling is so high, and also how you win games against Grimkins is usually by just reps, learning their tricks, learning their arcanas and what they can do. So the more practice you get, the more matchup becomes favored for Kruger.
I find it interesting because I also was requesting Grimkin games because I have just played against it a lot, and I also have that sort of feeling of comfort in that matchup. And my local, for a lot of the year was Rox, and he was playing Grimkin, so I had a lot of reps into it, and I felt very comfortable. Even though it's a dicey matchup, and Iona into Clockatrices is just you hit them with a hammer and hope that the stutters don't entirely go the Grimkin player's way.
Yeah.
But I had really a very high win percentage against Grimkin in general. And I was sort of requesting those games during the WTC. I mean, I didn't end up getting them within this year's WTC, but I was very happy to play them. And I'm interested because I think a lot of Circle players that I know about don't particularly like playing against Grimkin, but both of us kind of wanted to. You because you felt that Kruger 2 was a solid matchup and you were well practiced, and me because I felt that Iona was decent enough, but I could skill through it because of my number of repetitions. It's pretty damn rare that I get caught by any sort of sacrifice or ruin or stutter into a Crabbit or the Arcane Vortex. These things, once you've seen them enough times, they're a lot less dangerous. Now, of course, everybody forgets and everybody gets hit by something, and it's like countercharge. We all know it's there, but someone eventually gets you with it, right? But it's just a lot lower chance of happening if you've got more practice. So that was just, I'm interested to hear that. That's cool. And so that leads us basically all the way from last year up to this year. You mentioned that, as always, you were last second thinking about your off list and your pairing and so on. So just talk us a little bit through that. How did you eventually settle on a pairing? What was the reason?
To be honest, our whole team had this issue of deciding on a list. Because probably most teams had, because of the Oblivion. We were on a pause. Then I got, there was a dynamic update. Iona got nerfed and Bones got better. So I still liked Iona, but I was a bit worried that some matchups that I have practice into and I'm experienced there might not be as good as I think they are anymore. And I felt a bit like the whole year of experience I would need to repeat just to recheck those matchups, mostly into Gunlights, because it doesn't affect like Grimkin matchup or Scorn matchup. I wanted Iona to be for. And then Kruger 2, like he dropped. Like the Bones got better. I instantly built the Kruger 2 list I was happy with. The well-released made the list stronger, and extra points allowed you to get extra heavy, which is all I ever wanted for Kruger 2, because you always felt like you're playing a bit down compared to your opponent. We had like 10 points, 3 points, and other lists had like 20 points. So that was a huge difference. And we were lucky to have a big convention in Europe before the list lock. It was Swedish Masters, Battle at Lund. And I think partly because of you, you told me that you don't remember me, or when I was playing the Kruger 2, I was at my strongest, and that gave me the boost of confidence to try him. So I took Iona and Kruger 2 to Battle at Lund. And I found myself being really, really happy with Kruger 2. Out of like 13 games, I lost 1. So that's a good win ratio. And I felt like he was never as strong as he is now. And with Iona, I wasn't that happy with. I dropped her only twice during this tournament. And even though I won both of those games, I felt like I could use... in both of those games, I basically felt like I would be better off with Baldur 1. I was missing a bit like a terrain generation from rapid growth to protect myself from sprays. I was missing some tools against guns. So I felt like if I had Baldur 1 in my pairing, I would probably get more even distribution of just what list I drop. And I just felt he's more versatile in the meta. Before, I didn't really like Baldur 1 list. I had really bad results with him. He used to play with Blood Trackers and he had 12-inch control because Well wasn't available. And I just didn't like this list. But Robin, that was rocking the Baldur 1 whole year long with a very good result, right before the Battle at Lund, said in our Circle messenger group that he's struggling with Baldur 1 in the new scenario, new Steamroller packet. And I've built a list for him to try, which was more like combined arms approach. And he liked this list. He didn't change anything in this list from his practice, and he took the list to Battle at Lund and he won the Swedish Masters. So after seeing his result and after my experience with Iona, I just decided I will take this list for a spin. I've started playing it and my win ratio basically skyrocketed from how it was when I was playing the previous iteration of Baldur 1. I was really happy with it, and my only concern was Scorn, because we don't have Scorn in our meta, so it was really hard to get practice games in and to be sure that it's a good list into Scorn. But Pavel from Poland Central visited me like I think 2 days before list lock, and I got 2 games into Zal 2. And after this day, I was confident that I can take Scorn as well. So I was confident to send this list as my second list. I mean, I was as confident as I could be, but I wasn't confident.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting to hear your sort of thought process and the way that you really specifically used other events to test for. And it's funny because Battle at Lund have always had this sort of contention in their organization, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that they have to sort of, it's just a fact they have to deal with, which is that the time of that convention is directly before WTC, and they kind of want their event to have its own character, to have its own flavor, and not just be, you know, the WTC training event. But at the same time, they're throwing up a 5v5 just before WTC. Guess what happens? You know, people you know, test for WTC stuff. And the one reason I mentioned this is, for example, they were really discussing whether to allow the Hermit or not, despite the fact that it wasn't legal at that time, because everybody wanted to test WTC lists, and those would have the Hermit in, and they decided against it in order to maintain the character of the event and to maintain the tradition of, you know, only playing legal models at the time.
Yeah.
And I respected that argument. I didn't agree with it. I think personally I would have much preferred to get proper WTC training, but I agreed with the fact that not everybody is there to train for WTC, and that, you know, each event should have its own character, and it shouldn't just be a training day, you know. So I thought that was a really solid argument, and I found that pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, and for me, I didn't feel like the time is wasted, because I've tried Hermit before, and I knew that he isn't as game-breaking or game-changing as people thought. So I didn't really get this feeling that playing my list without him makes that big of a difference, even though I knew that he's going to be in at least one of my lists.
He changed my lists quite a bit, so for me it was a little bit more sad, and I would have liked the chance to test him with Iona to make sure that my theory crafting was correct, to leave him out of that list.
Right.
But, you know, again, I absolutely understood the thought process that they applied, so that was fair. So to answer the same sort of question from my side, my situation changed a little bit more than yours between last year and this year. So last year I was playing for the Czech Republic, where I live, and I was playing Legion of Everblight at that time. So we reached the semi-finals. We lost to you guys. We lost to Poland South in the semi-finals last year. It was really close. I really enjoyed it. And, you know, in fact, our game was actually between me and you. So it was a really cool way to reach the highest point so far, because for me, that was also my first and only WTC before this year. And at that time, I was just mainlining Animag. My second list was Callous One Ravens of War, I'm pretty sure. I'm not even 100%. I know I played Animag. And so during this year, I spent a lot of time sort of hoping that Privateer Press would fix some of the issues in Legion, and, you know, putting forward suggestions, and still working with what we had in Legion to create competitive lists. Sadly, nothing was better than JVM's Callous One, and I just got really sick of mainlining that list. And that was sort of this was the year where the Community Integrated Development, CID, for some reason I couldn't remember the letters. I could remember the words, but I couldn't remember the letters. So the CID was going very quickly, and with every passing CID, more broken shit was getting pumped out into the meta, and Legion was just getting horribly left behind. And at that time, when Lord of the Feast was the most broken model in the game by a long distance, I decided enough was enough and switched to Circle. So I arranged with a local collector who doesn't play all of his factions and has a lot of the models, that I would borrow his Circle for 6 months and play them through till the WTC and then return them, which I just did yesterday. It was quite strange to hand over all these models that I've sort of become very acquainted with and suddenly just hand them all back. Very strange, very strange. And I was thinking that if anyone asked me for a game, I'd be like, yes, oh, wait, shit, no, oh, God, I'd have to play Legion, and I sold my Primal Terrors, like, oh, no. Like, that is dreadful. So that was a big change. And the reason that I changed from Czech Republic to England was Twofold. First was that I just met the English guys at a bunch of conventions, and obviously that's my home country. And we just hit it off really well with the team members. We gelled really well, especially with regards to thought process. So how to think about matchups, how to think about pairing, how we performed our preparation, and how dedicated we were in terms of amount of time and travel and money that we were willing to invest, versus the Czech meta, which is has been struggling over this last year and has now sort of collapsed basically. And even at that time was already slowing down, and it was difficult to get people who were willing to travel and willing to go to events and things like that. So I was really excited to be able to apply for the England team, and even more excited when Pat came and invited me to play for England Lions. I was actually a little bit surprised because I'd spent more time with the England Knights team and with Jake and Mark and Ben, for those who know them, because they the Three Musketeers do like to travel, and so I'd met them a lot around Europe. And then, but then it was Pat that invited me, and that was a great honor because obviously he's basically the world champion, or at least in my mind. So to be invited was very, very pleasing. I don't know exactly how the British committee system works, so you'd have to ask one of them as to exactly how I got picked. But it ended up pretty well, so I'm happy about that. So that's my year running up to this event, and I put in a lot of games with Circle to come to the sort of caster choices. I ended up with a double Tharn pair, and that was Iona and Wormwood. I felt that the nerf to Iona really didn't matter that much, and I felt that she was still stupidly strong and did what she did really well, and that the only major effect was that your off list would need to deal with guns, and my off list was going to be Wormwood anyway. So I really didn't feel like it affected me that much, and I don't think it was a particularly smart way to nerf Iona. So I was fine with that, and I played Iona. The much bigger impact actually was the nerf to Lord of the Feast, which I've been screaming from the rooftops for a very long time. And I think that nerf has been fantastic. I think it's the bringing down the range, bringing down the reach has just made him an excellent free option that's very effective and has an impact on a lot of matchups. Sometimes he just gets killed. Sometimes he just can't reach the target. Sometimes he just doesn't kill enough to make him worth it. And that's how it should be. Whereas previously you would just always get maximum value in terms of time and killing, and he was just broken as all hell. But so those two nerfs did lower the power level of what I was playing a little bit. And then Oblivion came out, as you mentioned, and Bones got a lot better, again, as you mentioned. And I had to think about it because Bones versus Tharn is really like playing a different faction. I think you'd be the first to admit that it's only because you have so many repetitions with both that you feel comfortable there, that they're not particularly similar play styles.
Not really.
And that there are a lot of unique tech pieces and support pieces in both lists that almost make it feel like a different faction. Absolutely. And since I'd only just switched to Circle anyway, and I really didn't have a lot of repetitions with Bones, I think I'd played it about 3 times in those 6 months. And even though theoretically I believed that maybe Wormwood Bones would be a better list, I knew that I would play Wormwood better in Tharn. I knew that I wanted a Storm Raptor in one of my lists, and I knew that my Iona list was teched very specifically for Grimkin, and that as a result I wanted 2 heavies in that list. So all of those sort of criteria together led me to run Iona with 2 heavies and Wormwood with a Storm Raptor and Getorix. And the Hermit went into the Wormwood list because he's superb there. Wormwood can deliver him, he can deliver him well, and Hermit protects the Cassius very well, and Wormwood himself. And in the Iona list, I did not go with the Hermit because I felt that he couldn't keep up with the list, and Iona couldn't keep him alive. So that was my sort of thoughts and feeling in the run up to the year.
All right, so travel. You traveled to WTC first, I believe, because of the villa. So tell me something about it.
The villa. All right. So as part of the England preparation, I know a lot of countries, I know several countries do a similar thing. I know Germany and France also had a similar sort of week or few days before the WTC where the teams travel together. They all go to a rented flat, building, villa, whatever we have available that's big enough for enough people. And then we get a bunch of 4x4 boards and we just play like an absolute madman for the entire week, morning till night, nothing else, and just, share some food and some laughs, but just play like hell. We did the same thing last year. It was one of the best weeks of my life. And I almost killed myself on my own Blightbringer. And this year we did the same thing, but a little better prepared, I think. And it was actually Mark from the Knights team that organised it and invested some money. You know, he risked... I'd like to put out a little shout out to Mark here because he put money down on this without any guarantee of getting it back. It was quite a lot, and it was in just him doing his part. Like, he could tell that he just felt it was him doing his part to support the England WTC movement. A considerable risk to himself with a considerable amount of organisation and reputation on the line, and it was amazing. It worked out perfectly. I'm really glad that he was willing to do that, and it was such a great effort and effect on the English WTC effort this year. So thank you very much, Mark. I much appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else who went there did.
Yeah, same.
So therefore, that was organised, and we went there, and basically, as I say, just played all week. And as a result, my travel was a bit sort of strange. So I went from Czech Republic to Vienna because of the airport there, flew to London, met up with the UK guys there, and then drove down through the Channel Tunnel, through France to Belgium. So I changed the time zone twice and didn't even have to move my watch. And then we played all week, and you joined us at the end of that week. Were you there for the last night or the last 2 nights? Sorry, I can't remember. It was chaos.
Last night. We traveled on Thursday very early morning, and our travel was a lot easier. We took like a 20 minutes taxi from my place, and then we were at the airport. From the airport, we arrived to Brussels. We rented a car and we drove to the villa. So we spent almost whole day and 1 night there.
Perfect. And what did you think about the atmosphere in the villa? Like, I mean, Jesus. You know, I'm English, so for me it was totally normal. But I'm sure it must have been a little bit strange from an out. So what was your perspective? Tell me all about it. I'm really interested.
I mean, it was amazing. Like, from the moment we arrived, everyone was so warm and welcoming and nice to us. We enter the villa, we see some guys cooking, we see some guys playing, and I think like they were playing everywhere. Like, at some point, I remember I went downstairs to the basement and there had people playing there too. Like, it was perfect.
We bought 10 4x4s and we just had to find places to put them. So like we had like 1 on the porch, 3 in the living room, 2 in the kitchen, 3 in the basement. Like, and then I think we had 1 left over and we had nowhere to put it. So it ended up just going in the shower room. So I don't think anyone ever actually played a game on that table. Fortunately, I don't think we ever needed the 10th table. But if they did, then anyone having a shower would just be looking directly onto a 4x4. So
yeah. So imagine I enter the villa, I say hi to everyone around. I barely left my stuff. I found a place to leave them. And then like Danny walked to me and asked if I'm looking for a game. Like 5 minutes later, I'm playing a game. So that was awesome.
It was really difficult to move around that house without getting challenged to a game. Like, like people kept coming in, like new people would come in and say, "So how do I get games?" I said, "Oh, don't worry about it. As soon as you go through those doors, you'll be playing in about 5 minutes versus somebody." Unless you play Troll Bloods, because nobody cares about playing Troll Bloods. But I don't think we had any Troll Blood players, so that's good.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to we'll move on a little bit then. Your team composition. What was your team composition faction-wise this year?
Okay, so Pavel Kruk, who was playing Convergence of Cyrus last year, he switched to Crucible Guard after the previous WTC and played Crucible Guard ever since. He brought Silvestro in Magnum Opus and Locke in Prima Materia, so no surprises there. Mm-hmm. And next, Tomek Okulski was playing Grimkins. He was playing Child in Dark Menagerie the whole year, so he decided to bring that as his main list. And to pair it with, he wanted to bring Old Witch, but the thing was that he had practice with Old Witch in Dark Menagerie, but not in Bump. But we concluded that probably Bump is just better, so he should bring that. So week before list lock, he decided to take Old Witch in Bump, even though he had very little to none practice with it, and to take this quest of learning the list shortly before WTC.
Okay.
Next, Arthur Ritz. He wanted to play Kriegs for a very long time, so he played Scar 1, and he was looking for a second list, which was a lot of weird ideas and some ideas that required a lot of practice and time that he didn't have. So in the end, I've convinced him to play Circle, because double Circle is easy to build in a team. He's a long-time Circle player. I think he's playing Circle like for 6 years or something like that. So he could quickly switch to Circle with no problems. And I decided to bring Balder 1, so Iona was free. She's easy to play and she's still very strong. So in the end, he brought Iona, and as his second list, we wanted him to bring Wormwood in Bones of Ouroboros, but he played a game or two and thought that with such shortly before WTC, because it was like 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the list lock, he won't get practice with Wormwood to be so comfortable that he can bring it to WTC. So he brought Chromac 1 instead. Then Marcin Majsek, who has exceptional brain for list innovations and just weird ideas. He's the double adjudicator guy from the previous year.
Oh yeah, well I have a lot of respect for how Marcin thinks about the game. I think he, as you say, he's a very innovative player, certainly, and it's a rare combination to have. It's not like, I mean, some players are innovative in the way that they just try all manners of jank and then they maybe accidentally realize that one of them is quite good.
Yeah.
But that's not how Marcin does it. Like, he sits down and really thinks it through. His knowledge of the game is almost encyclopedic, from what I can tell. And he really is able to constructively think about how those interactions work in his head and then put those things on the table. And I'm sure that some of those things don't work, of course, but I think it's more targeted innovation than maybe some other people. And I have a lot of respect for the list that he comes up with as a result of that. And he definitely puts the time in to practice those lists and to get used to them and to really be able to surprise people with some of the smaller interactions. So a great player and someone that people can learn from for sure.
Yeah, I would say he approaches the list building more like a scientist than like an artist.
Yes.
So in the end, he ended up with double blockader because because it was very similar to what he used to play, which was Krios 1 double adjudicator, and because he felt like this sheer power of this list, the ease of playing it, and also tricks he can pull is just really good and can surprise some players that think that the list is just linear and easy. And then his second list was Magnus, and Marcin is a long-time Mercs player, so he used to play Magnus for a very, very long time, so he was practiced with it. And he just tweaked his irregulars list with from Galleon to Blockader, and yeah, it was just a solid list that he had a lot of practice with. Same like for me and Kruger. Yeah. And I've described my choice. So in the end, it's Circle, Gremkin, Mercs, and Crucible Guard.
And how did that feel when you came into the pairing process and you looked at, a lot of the teams that were there? So a lot of teams had some variety of Circle, Grimkin, Harby, and Scorn, and then plus, one other thing. And when you came with your 5 pairs, did you share any dodges? Did you have any unexpected problems or advantages during the matchup process where you felt, oh, wow, this has worked out really well, or, oh, God, we didn't prepare for this? How did it go with your 5 factions? Was it a good selection?
I would say it was, yes. Before we decided on our factions and before we decided if Arthur is going to play Kriegs or Circle, before we decided what what's going to be our pairings. We did some metrics, we did some simulations, we've tried different compositions, and we found that the current setup, really, we didn't share dodges together. The only problem was Scorn, but the problem is not because our factions were bad into Scorn, mostly because we just didn't have Scorn locally. That was a huge issue for us. So it was really hard to get practice games in. So we all kind of rated Scorn matchups based on more than theory than practice. Of course, everyone had some games against Scorn in some tournaments, or we traveled to get a game in or two, but it's not like you can get 10 or 15 games in. And I'm not sure if you know, but I have a master's degree from dodging Scorn. I never get to play them. I rarely get them in a tournament. Usually I just dodge them. So yeah, we felt like the team composition is really good. The issue might be Scorn, but after I've played those 2 games against Pavel, and after I could change my Scorn matchup from red to yellow, which is kind of more 55%. I was happy with it. So after those 2 games, I was confident that this setup is really good and it will get us very far.
Okay.
How about you?
Well, we had a bit of a weird lineup in a way, because we had double Circle, double Grimkin, and Harby. And our Circle players, which was myself and Brett Wilkie, had very similar dodges. So there were 1 or 2 situations where we had different approaches, but basically both of us wanted to dodge Harby all the time. There was almost no Harby list that either one of us wanted to see ever.
All right.
And then we both had a weakness into Scorn. So we could play it, but basically Zal 2's list is horribly overtuned in every single model and way. And it's impossible to interact with it in any way other than befuddle, which we don't have. So it was a case of sort of Harby and Zal, Harby and Zal, Harby and Zal. On the flip side of that, we had double Grimkin, which posed a lot of people a lot of problems, because we had 2 very strong Grimkin players, Pat and Matthew Gallagher. And so the sort of problem that it presented people was that if we put out a Circle player early and they tried to put Harbinger into it, we could pick the other one and then slam double Grimkin into the Harbinger, and they're just fucked. So we were very happy with our ability to threaten people very well with double Grimkin. Grimkin could face basically anything, because the Clockatrice is just so broken and nuts that with the list that they put together. So we had basically Matt was mainlining King of Nothing in Bump, and Pat had a very strong Dreamer list, obviously, but also Old Witch. And so between them, they weren't too nervous into anything. And so it allowed us to play around quite a lot. And what basically ended up happening was that the table choices led to a lot of Circle mirrors. So if the opponent wins tables, then you know that their Circle players are going to pick non-Circle opponents if they can, and then go on Forest tables. So to counteract this, we basically, whenever we lost the table choices, we would slam our Circle players into theirs so that they weren't able to do that. And so in the end, I ended up playing 5 Circle mirrors. And then we often just had to deal with the Zal players as well, so that the rest of our team could deal with everything else that was going on. And they did so very, very well. But in the end, it meant that Brett got bussed into Zal 3 times. And he was a bit irritated because he said, look, if you'd told us before the tournament, I could have teched for this. But nobody told him he was going to be the Zal Slayer. And to be honest, nobody told me that I was just going to be playing Circle mirrors all weekend. I could have definitely made some tech choices if I'd known that. So we were a little bit surprised and quite interested about how it worked out. But it worked out very well, I would say. And of course, we just chose tables every time because Grimkin and Circle both really benefit. And Harby as well, actually. Our whole team benefited really heavily from terrain. So
yeah, how do you feel about table choice?
What do you mean?
How do you feel in general? Which one is stronger, matchups, tables, or does it depend on the team composition?
I don't know. In our team composition, it was tables every single time, and I cannot imagine a situation where I wouldn't pick tables. I think it's just too important. But maybe there is some composition somewhere where they can just play on every table and they don't care what table they're on, or they really have some hardcore dodges and hardcore wins, and they were a lot like if you had a really, really skewed matchup matrix for your team, then maybe you'd want to pick matchups. I don't know. But our approach, sort of which came down from Pat and the other guys that have been in the team for longer, they just said, look, make sure your pairing is incredibly balanced. We have 5 strong balanced pairings with 5 strong balanced players. And that's very hard to beat in a team tournament because it's very difficult to single people out and to find weaknesses. And then in the end, we ended up with double circle, double Grimkin. So obviously someone didn't get the memo, and I think it was probably me.
Yeah, so in my eyes, tables is always better. So there's a common knowledge, or a lot of people have this opinion that if you have even matchups into your opponent, you should pick tables. But if you have really bad matchups and you need a lot of dodges, you should pick matchups, right? So
that's one way of thinking about it. Yeah, sure.
In my eyes, in this case, you should pick tables even more because you can skew those matchups with tables. And those tables are, in WTC, the terrain is very skewy. So if you have a really bad matchups, your team will probably get some bad matchups. Let's say it's the differences between 2 and 3 bad matchups. So if you get 3 bad matchups, it's still better to have them than 2. But because you can pick tables, you can kinda make some lists not work because of the terrain, especially if you can see the scenario and the terrain. So for instance, you take Harbinger, it's king of the hill. If there's a terrain she doesn't want to see, that makes you match up really good into her because it's bad scenario for her, it's bad terrain for her. Your opponent might need to be forced into his second list. So in my eyes, terrain is a bit too strong, and I would say, or maybe even suggest to WTC committee for next year that maybe the players that choose matchups should also pick the last 2 tables, which means the table choice is still very strong, and it's very small tweak because the players that choose tables, they still pick the 3 best ones for them and leave those that maybe doesn't matter for last. But at least those players that pick the last 2 matchups can pick between the 2 tables that were left for them. So how do you feel about it?
I think that would require some testing, but that's a really interesting idea. I think the fact that a lot of people, I think once or twice we lost the team roll-off and were given the table choices anyway. Now, of course, we think that's clearly just a mistake.
Yeah.
But the fact that some people think it is actually a choice suggests that it's not massively imbalanced. Your suggestion is a really interesting one. I haven't heard that before. Maybe it's been presented before, but I just haven't heard it. And I think that's definitely worth some thought. Yeah. Cool. Right. I think we need to get into the round by rounds because we've got not that long before we should start the interview with Christian. So let's get to it, I guess. Right. Round 1. Who did you have?
Round 1, we got United Nations, which is a team composed of players from around the world. So there's no odd numbers of teams. Our opponents won the Raw and chose tables. I was left for last, so I could pick between 2 matchups. I've picked Grimkins. I don't remember what was the other one. We were playing King of the Hill on a table with 2 big buildings. My opponent chose the Child in Dark Menagerie. I chose Kruger 2. And the game was pretty even on attrition. I was a bit up on scenario. In the end, I was left with World Warden and 2 World Words and a lot of support. He was left with Clockatrice and Skin and Mons. Child was a camping 2, had a Tantrum up, but he couldn't transfer because his war beasts were full. I decided to go for an assassination, but in the middle of assassination, my opponent realizes he actually can transfer because of some confusion with the Fury on the table. But I decided to go for an assassination anyway. The odds were high. So I've killed the Child and the team went 4-1.
Okay. My round one was versus Scotland, and I ended up playing against Billy Crookshanks. As you mentioned, it was on King of the Hill, and his pairing was Chromac 1 and Who Gives a Damn, because when he's got Chromac 1, I cannot play Wormwood. Yeah. And so he just sat down and sort of calmly said, "So, you want to play Wormwood?" I was like, "Not particularly, righto." So we sat down and set up Iona versus Chromac 1, Bones. And the game was quite an interesting one, and I think it highlighted some of the interest of the King of the Hill scenario, which is that we ended up splitting the table, but not in the way that you normally would. So very often you will see like a clockwork rotation whereby, you know, one player goes left, so the other player also goes to their left, and you end up circling around the central line of sight blocking terrain. But in this case, Billy just ran everything straight up the middle. Not least because of my ambush threat. I have harrass specs with my Bloodweavers, so they actually can do some damage. And so he played very centrally, and I'm playing Iona, so I always play wide, but I'm playing extra wide because of the scenario. And in the end, we ended up just splitting the scenario 2-2 to the point where I actually had one of my war beasts just staying out of command for the entire game. Out of control, sorry. Just sitting in the other zone, scoring it. And so the game essentially sort of went, he scores the central zone and the central flag. I score the outside 2 rectangles. We both attempt to contest those pieces, and then we repeat. And that, obviously, with his very high threat ranges from his Getterix, and because of roads, Warpath, and all this sort of stuff, it became very standoffy. But after a while, we got into the grind. We started trading pieces, and he was definitely just starting to squeak ahead on the attrition. And then just towards the end, he was definitely picking up pace on the attrition. But sadly, he'd spent a lot of clock getting to that point. And there was a stage during the game where my Ravager UA toughed, I think, 3 or 4 times in a row. And it just cost him so much time and decision making. You know, he had to rethink his order of activation and try and solve this problem, and just couldn't get there to get more shots into it and stuff like that. So that really was a massive turning point in the game, and I think probably cost him the clock that he would have needed to close the game out. But in the end, Billy clocks out, and I win with Iona versus Chromac 1, Bones.
Have you ever thought that our practice games Chromac 1 into your Iona will be useful for WTC?
No, I absolutely did not. But I did indeed have to deploy Iona quite a bit back to avoid his turn 1 shenanigans. And I'm still not sure to this day whether choosing to go second was correct or not.
Me neither.
Don't know. I really don't know. Right. So round 2, who did you have and how did it go?
We got England roses, and we approached the tables, and I know one of the players, the Paul Shirt. We chat a lot online, and I must say the atmosphere was super nice, very relaxed. We were joking around and stuff, and I approached our app that we have our matchups there. And I see my matchups were really, really good. Like, I would say I'm a player that some players are very optimistic with their matchup ratings. Some are very pessimistic. Mine's are probably in the middle, I would say. But in this case, I have had a lot of good matchups. I think I wanted to avoid mirror, and that's it. Because there was Chromac 1, I couldn't play my comfort list, which was Kruger 2. So I said to Marcin that just put me wherever you want. I want one of those 2 tables because we want tables, and I need to go to the restroom. When I got back, they announced that I'm playing into Kader, into Jonathan Clark. And I got like panic mode because I realized I don't know what Zerkova 2 does. He had, I think, Vlad 1 and Zerkova. I was comfortable with Vlad 1, but I have no idea what I put like a green matchup into that. I think during the rating, I might have just opened Zerkova to see what she does. And there was nothing that I was worried about. So I just put extra green. But now when I got her, I started re-evaluating my matchup. And I just had no idea what it is. So I asked Marcin to explain me what Zerkova does, but he didn't have much time to explain me all the details. He sure. Basically said that she will try to kill you, and the threat range is very long. So I felt I want Stormraptor in both of those games. So both into Zerkova and into Vlad, he would be useful. So I dropped Baldur. He dropped Zerkova too. I think I chose the side. He went first. I start my turn. I roll for deviation from the well into his ponies. I got the perfect deviation, got all the ponies. That was the unit he put spell that allowed him to arc for them. So that was very lucky beginning. And I knew that he will go for assassination. So I opted not to put all my upkeeps with Baldur to turn 1 like you usually do, because that leaves you with 1 transfer. So instead I just put 2 upkeeps and camped 2 with Spiny Grove up. I positioned my army behind the forest, so pass the clock, and Jonathan measures things to Baldur. So I was right with my instinct. Yeah. So he said that because I was so careful, the assassination is off the table, but instead he will just kill my whole army. I was like, what? So he starts his turn by running everything towards my army. Then Zerkova fits. Then he removes. I think he left Stormraptor on 17 boxes and his rolls weren't too good. Then he removes 5 Ravagers, removes Breed, leaves Skull stationary, leaves Lord of the Fist stationary, and something else. He did a lot of damage, not in points wise, but the amount of miniatures I removed from the table was more than was left on the table.
Right.
After that, I think that was my 5th turn, so I removed everything that ran into me. Stormraptor had a perfect pulse that swiped the whole flank of the table. Then I had a good run with Death Wolves. I scored 4 CPs, and that was Baldur's 5th turn. So he couldn't retaliate back. So he decided to just get Stormraptor to finish it for some army points. But his dice went really, really cold, and he left Stormraptor on 5 boxes. And next turn I just won on scenario.
Right. Okay. But, a bit of a squeaky round against Zerkova too. All right.
Yeah. How about you?
Our round 2 was versus Malaysia. So it was really nice to see a new team coming to the WTC. And it was funny because their team was Malaysia Tigers and we were England Lions. So it was really Lions versus Tigers. And lots of people were excited about that. So that was fun. I played against a guy called Helmi. And it was my 2nd Circle Mirror on bunkers. I looked at his list and figured I could play my Wormwood into it. It's the list that I'm more comfortable playing into Circle Mirrors. I think it's pretty good for it. And so I dropped that, and he dropped his Baldur 1. His Baldur 1 had a Stormraptor and no Getorix, and so I felt like I was going to have really good strangleholds, easy decision-making, so clock shouldn't be such a huge issue.
Yep. And how do you feel about this matchup? Because I think in the Villa, you told me it's not so good.
Yeah, not a huge fan of it when they've got Getorix. So basically, Baldur can protect his Getorix, and he delivers his Getorix before you do because of his feat. And you haven't got enough strangleholds in Wormwood Tharn to reliably stranglehold the Getorix and the bird, and frankly, you very rarely get line of sight to Getorix if he doesn't want you to. So I felt after playing it a couple of times against Robin that it was definitely problematic. But into his particular version of Baldur 1 that I felt was a little bit weaker and a little bit more susceptible to Wormwood, I dropped to Wormwood.
All right.
And so we went into the game, and essentially it went as planned. So I had Stranglehold on his Stormraptor every turn, and I had Ravagers and Death Wolves standing 6.5 inches away from the Stormraptor and just saying, right, well, pulse this. And so he was just having to take individual shots and triggering vengeance and things like that. But in the meantime, my bird was just pulsing the world. So it got one enormous pulse, cleared out almost an entire unit of Blood Trackers and several Ravagers, repositioned back, put a couple of things in the way. He had charged it with a lot of stuff. He didn't quite get enough, didn't manage to kill it. I then went in again with the Hermit and Skyfire and pulsed the entire world once more. So just killed more than half his army with just the Storm Raptor pulses. And he simply couldn't come back from that sort of attrition loss. So in the end, I think I was able to take it on scenario, but I can't remember. It might have been scenario or casting. No, I think I killed Balder in the end. But really, the attrition was so much in my favor, it didn't matter too much.
Yeah. So how did your team do?
We went 5-0 in both games against Scotland and Malaysia.
Nice.
And so we were our spirit was so high by this point because we'd played against Norway Munin on the Friday for a practice game. And we went 4-1 into them. And we knew that they were one of the strongest teams going into the event. So our morale was so high, and it was almost 5-0. I gave him something like a 50%er on Iona, and he took it with his last remaining clockatrice. We were on fire. We were feeling top of the world.
All right, that's cool. Good job.
Thank you, man. Thank you. But then we went into round 3. But we'll come on to your round 3 first. So, who was your round 3, and how did it go?
I will spend a bit more time on this round because it's one of my favorite rounds. We got USA East, so that's Jake Van Meter's team, and we played last year. We played up to the 7th turn, and Jake won it on tiebreakers with points killed. So I was really looking forward for a rematch. And before WTC, I think I had a really good matchup into Legion in my ratings, and I didn't know what to put into Jake because he's not only good, he's just one of the best, if not the best Legion players in the world, right? So I thought I probably need some practice into Kalus 1 just to refresh my memory of this matchup. And then I thought but what are the odds I'm gonna play Jake? So the moment I said it, I knew that I probably need to get some games in, and because it's probably going to happen. So I asked my local, my local Legion player. I asked him to put a scenario that he feels is the best for Kalus, to put the terrain he feels is advantaged for Kalus, and we played Kruger 2 into Kalus 1. Both games went quite good, but they were so draining. And I think in both of those games, I had 15 seconds on the clock or something like this when the game ended. So I knew that if I'm going to play it in WTC against a good player in high tables, I might have troubles with clock.
Right.
So I approached the table because Jake and we were both captains. We had a chat. I think Jake also suggested we should have a grudge match and a rematch from last year. Mm-hmm. We won tables where we were very, very happy about that. There was no way we were in any round. If we won the roll, we were always choosing tables.
Yeah.
And so when it went to me being almost last, I think, and I got paired into Jake, I was so focused to choose a table that's going to be good for Kruger. So I didn't want to see any forest he can hide Helmos behind. And I chose the beach table that had no forests and very little line of sight blockers and stuff like that. And I think when the next matchup was going on, I was like, no, panic. I was so focused on good table for Kruger that I did not consider that I have my second list and it's also playable into Kalus 1, right? And it's probably a good idea to drop it because the second list is Balder 1 and it's a lot easier on clock. So I think last minute I asked Tomek if I switch the table that we agreed which one we are going to take. If I switch the table and put him on the beach table, if it's going to affect his matchup negatively, significantly. And he said maybe a 2% less. So I jumped into another table that had a building and a forest so close each other I could close the gap with rapid growth. Jake won the roll-off and decided to go first, as Kalus does. It spread the net. I've picked Balder 1, which I think he didn't expect because we were so in a mood of doing the rematch of last year. And I really wanted to, but I felt I have just better chances with Balder, especially on this table.
Right. Okay.
So I think he had some troubles deploying Helmhoff. He said he won't give me Helmhoff bottom of 1 like he did last year. And then he had some problems deploying Helmhoff. And in the end, he decided to leave it in my threat ranges so I can kill it bottom of 1. So he runs up, I move up, and during his turn, I started thinking about killing the Helmhoff, but because it would cost me a lot of positioning just to get there, he was in my threat range, but he was in threat range of Storm Raptor, and there was a well in a way, so I wasn't sure if I'm going to be able to put the base to get 14 inches to the Helmhoff. The Helmhoff is in a trench, and I need to position my army kinda around it to feed the Storm Raptor in a place I wouldn't otherwise put the Storm Raptor there. And then I need some space for reposition. My head was hurting, and I was like, just fuck it, just leave it. Just leave this Helmhoff for 1 extra turn. I don't want to spend time. I don't want to get tilted. My head hurts, so it's better probably to save my energy for later. And it turns out to be a good decision because we go to Jake's turn, and this Helmhoff is in a way of Chosen's. So next to the building, like 3 inches from the building, there's this Helmhoff, and he cannot charge through it, or it cripples the movement of Chosen's.
Right, he can't kill it, or he can, but it would fuck him up even more. Yeah.
Yeah. So it turns out I accidentally made a good decision. And I think Jake lost a lot of clock on this turn because he didn't know whether or not he wants to fit. So some moves were like he didn't like he wouldn't fit, but then he decided he's going to fit. So he started to be more aggressive with some other things. He jumped me. Then it goes to my turn. I start with Storm Raptor again. It's like, you know that with pools, it's better to kill the incubi because they are very high in defense, right? And Ravagers can kill birds. But because of order of activation, because of the time, because I would need to position my army so I don't get them with the pools. Again, my head was like aching, so I was like, just start doing things in whatever order. It's hard to screw up because it's a melee army and I have my feet. So Storm Raptor goes in, pulses some birds, I kill a bunch of Chosen, I kill a bunch of incubis, I fit with Baldur, I connected the forest with the building, and it's probably the first time I upkept my forest for probably entire game. And you can see that the direction of the game changes, and we are playing left-right because the forest and building cut the table in half diagonally.
Right.
Yeah. So then in Jake's turn, we're basically fighting each other, and I sent Lord of the Fist on. I didn't want to commit my Lord of the Fist to the very end, but I had like a shot into Helmhoff with Lord of the Fist. I could give Size Importance, and I could give Stone Skin. So I did, but the Helmhoff was in the trench, so I was like, I need a 7. If I hit, it's good, but if I don't hit, the place where my Lord of the Fist is won't be that bad. I'm not going to lose him. So I failed. So Lord of the Fist stayed in position, very aggressive position he was in, but he didn't die. Then in Jake's turn, I think it was this turn when he decided to drag Getorix from the middle of the table to the right to take him away from the Blightbringer, so he can position Blightbringer more aggressively, because he felt like if he leaves the Getorix there in the middle, he needs to start backing off, and it's probably not good for a scenario game. But I didn't know how Jake asked me after the game how I felt about this move, and I'm still not unsure whether or not it was good or not, because I was full on fury on both of my war beasts. One of them would need to frenzy, and if I frenzy from the position the Getorix was in, he would just die next turn because he wouldn't be able to Spiny Growth, and I wouldn't be able to move him. So I felt like it saved my Getorix, putting him behind the building in a safe spot. So the games goes to the 7. It's a grind, but in the end, I've managed to remove a whole right flank and start running my things towards the left flank. I struggled to contest Jake's zone, but he started struggling to contest both flag and my zone later on. So I catch up on points, I was up on clock, and in the end we again went to tiebreakers, this time CPs, and I won on scenario.
Okay.
Great game, fantastic experience, and I hope to play Jake next year to have the best of 3.
Well, I mean, from my point of view, that was an amazing one to listen to, because obviously, as I said, I used to play Legion, and so hearing about Circle versus Legion, especially against Jake, who's, in my opinion, probably the best Legion player there is, it's just a fantastic game to hear about. That's a cool way to go. And how did your team round finish?
So the team went 4-1. We lost a game into Scorn. It was not Kruger, Chromac 1 versus Zal 2, and we lost that one.
Oh, I mean, 4-1 into USA East, who are another one of the, in our opinion, were one of the big contenders to win, is an incredible result. Nice one.
Yeah, we were pretty happy about that.
So, as I said, we were feeling top of the world going into round 3, and then we drew Germany, Wildsau, and who I think a lot of people considered to be Germany 1, essentially. So you had 2 of the very well-known sort of WTC legend-type players, and 3 other very, very solid players. You know, it was just a really strong team. And the only thing that we thought might hamper them a little bit is that some of them had spent some time away from the game. I don't know, you know, we didn't know exactly what their training level was like. We assume it was pretty high, but you know, there was a slight hope that maybe some of them had been away from the game a little bit, and it might impact their play. But I mean, again, as I say, we really were feeling top of the world, and we just felt like we could beat anyone and anything. And so Germany came up, and we were like, okay, well, let's just beat them as well. Turned out to be really hard to do. And we ended up with, again, Brett being thrown into the Zal player and me being thrown into the Circle mirror. So pretty standard. And so I was playing against Robin Maukish. I think that's how to pronounce his surname. Sorry if I butchered it. And we were having a chat before the game, and we basically said, right, okay, I can play this, but because of his pairing, which was Movana 2 with Tharn, and then something in Bones, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was Wormwood, yeah?
Kruger 2 in Bones.
Oh, Kruger 2. And so because of that, I said, basically, we won the tables, and I want to put him on a forest table to force him more into playing Movana 2, so that I can play my Wormwood Tharn where I think that I'm slightly favoured. Because I've got Hellmouth, I've got access to RFP. I think that Wormwood Tharn with a Storm Raptor is really strong in general into the Tharn mirror. And I've played Movana 2 quite a bit, so I know what she does well. And I felt that we could have the best chance there. So we chose the tables, and he did choose Movana 2, so that was great. That plan sort of worked as we wanted. It did give Brett an even harder time against Zal 2 because he didn't have the best table for it, but that was sort of how our plan went in making sure that we were in a good position to win 3 games.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I don't remember all of the details of this game. It was one of the best games of War Machine that I've played. It was incredibly intensive, and it came down to the last control point at the bottom of 7, and with less than a minute on clock with both players combined.
All right.
But because of the level of intensity of the game, in other words, our teams went 2-2, and so we were aware that this was the deciding round. And there were a lot of people in the room and a lot of people around the tables starting to watch this game, and the intensity was really picking up. That it just the relief when I managed to win was so incredible that I think I nearly snapped a vocal cord. One of your teammates came to run up to hug me, and I was like, "What the hell is a Polish guy doing celebrating this win?" And it turns out that he's competing with him for like WTC record or something, and I'd helped him quite a bit by reducing Robin's record. But I don't think I've ever seen a player that wasn't involved in the game so happy to see one player win, you know. And then, of course, my team were close behind, and we were really celebrating very hard. But as I say, so do forgive me for the lack of details on this one. I've tried hard and I really can't remember how it sort of went step by step.
Tell me about the last seconds.
Well, I can tell you about the lead up to the last seconds and then how that sort of played out. So essentially, it was a fairly standoffy game. Because our threat ranges are essentially the same, but I have got access to Hellmouth, so I've got a slight advantage there, I would say. And so we're standing off a lot, but then he gave me this one opportunity on the left side, which I decided to go for pretty hard. So he put a few Ravagers a little bit too close to one of my units of Ravagers. And so I decided to go pretty hard in for that and put Curse of Shadows on that unit and pop the UA overtake mini feat and was just relying on him not toughing and my guys hitting the boosted 8s needed and then the hard 6s afterwards because some of his guys were in forests.
Right.
And I was just saying, right, please don't tough now because then this will all be great. He toughed a reasonable amount, I would say, and I think the dice were pretty fair on that run. I was kind of hoping for a little bit of luck. I was hoping for just like maybe a slightly better result than I got, but I got a good advantage on that side. But I'd gone in pretty hard on that side, and so he was able to go in pretty hard on the other side. I would say that was his biggest mistake of the game, was just giving me a little bit too much on that side. My biggest mistake of the game by far was that I used Hellmouth on his other side, and I purposefully targeted a piece that was not a Ravager. And for some reason in my head, the Hellmouth AoE, like non-blast damage rolls were not an attack, so I was not planning to give him Vengeance, and I did.
Oh, yeah.
And because I did that, I then had to commit Lord of the Feast to kill the 2 Ravagers that were then going to get in range to really do some work on me. And even that was frankly a little bit lucky because that Lord of the Feast needed to roll a hard 7. And if he didn't, he was just going to be out front and dead. So I made a mistake with the Hellmouth misunderstanding of the rule. My fault. I've been playing Wormwood for long enough. I should have checked this one out by now. And as a result, he got a Vengeance in and he started to get an advantage on that side. And so luckily, his mistake on the other side allowed me to take an advantage on that side. And we started to do that sort of clockwork maneuvering. And my Cowl was constantly threatening his well with prey.
All right.
And his well was placed very centrally because there was a big burning cloud there. So his well was just sitting in the fire and therefore sort of taking up board space that would already be taken up by the terrain, I would say. Yeah, so I thought that was a pretty good move.
And if you go in to kill the well, you put your stuff on fire, right?
Yeah, you take a bit of fire. I mean, it was a good move. And I'd given him that table edge to sort of hamper him a little bit, and he managed to neutralize that disadvantage a little bit with that positioning choice. So I respect that, but it did sort of cut his army in half a little bit.
Yeah,
and it meant that when I collapsed one flag, it made it more difficult for him to come and contest. So because this was on Spread the Net, and I was sort of starting to take control of his rectangular zone and my flag, but he was doing the same thing on the other side.
All right.
And after a while, we entered into the final minutes of the game, and I had a reasonable clock advantage. But as you know, and as a lot of people know, I have a problem with getting distracted by other players that come too close to the table or that are talking really loudly while I'm playing. And I realized that we were going to go to turn 7, and I realized that this was going to go down to scenario points, and it was going to matter who could contest the most and who could make sure that they continued to score. And so I was trying to work out 3 turns in advance how to play the following 3 turns while people were being pretty loud behind me. Or maybe they weren't, but maybe I'm just really responsive to it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, Paul from my team, he knows this, and he's an absolute legend. And he just started playing security guard and just getting people out of my way. So it's just like, you get the fuck away. Go on. Move it. Come on, move it along now. Nothing to see here. Like just getting people away. And another big nod to my opponent, Robin. An amazing show of sportsmanship. One of the German spectators came again in pretty close to the table, and Robin told him in no uncertain terms, to move away, step away from the table. Simon's trying to think, get back.
Yeah. Nice.
And I have a huge respect for that, because obviously he threw away an advantage that he was getting that was through no fault of his own. But, he immediately reacted and was very understanding. As a result of that, I was able to plan out the next 3 turns, and it was very intense. The timing was very difficult and so on. but used some shifting stones to block off some entrances, used Hellmouth to pull some of his pieces away so they weren't contesting anymore. I used one unit of shifting stones to completely bubble wrap his hermit so he couldn't move. So I basically just put all 3 shifting stones directly around his hermit so he couldn't run.
Yeah.
Bit of a stupid move, actually. I should have just used one of them to Hellmouth him out of the zone. But instead, I bubble wrapped him because I didn't want him to contest my flag. I knew that my flag was my main scoring piece. And in the end, in a very, very tense game, I was able to score the last control point on the bottom of 7 and win the game. So our team won 3-2 and we moved into round 4. So It was a really, really big moment. I went and drank a lot of rum.
Nice, congrats. Sounds like you did some really good moves, and on low clock situations it's really, really hard. So it shows the player's skill, really, how they play their late game.
I was really proud of that game, and again, you know, I every time that I have a good late game situation, I tend to thank or praise you for it, because you were the one that sort of taught me how to play the late game originally, and it definitely came into play here, like just ignoring activations that don't matter, focusing only on the things that score and contest, and figuring out in advance what's going to contest and score next. So, you know, again, thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks. Glad I could help.
And so we move into round 4. Who was your opponent and how did it go?
So we were playing into this year's surprise. Like last year we played into Czech, and I think you guys were this year's surprise, like the team that no one expected to go that high. And
Sure.
This time we played into Wales. I don't know how to say it.
I have no idea either. Don't worry about it. Wales.
Yeah, Wales. So those guys are super, super nice. Like incredibly friendly. Like it's round 4, so like quarterfinals, but the atmosphere was really relaxed. Again, I told my team that I want Grimkins, and it made sense to drop me into Grimkins. We lost tables. I got what I call the porn table, because whoever gets one side of the table is going to just contest forever. Because there was a building, it had L letter shape, and both of the edges of the building were outside of the zone, but the inside of the L letter was inside the zone, and there was a small portion of the zone protruding through the building, so you could put a model there and it would contest infinitely, and your opponent would need to go around the building to get to this model.
Okay.
Yeah, so I got to play Dan Jones, a very nice gentleman, and scenario was... What was the scenario in round 4? Do you remember?
On round 4, it was Invasion.
Invasion, yeah. All right, so we're playing Invasion. I think Dan won the role to go first. He decided to go first, so I chose the porn side. And yeah, so we had a game that was like, really scenario wasn't relevant. That was King of Nothing versus Kruger 2. So clocks were trying to get me like in the front, and on flanks he had both of the Nayslayers. The Nayslayers had trouble to go in because of the Sentry Stone threat, and also I put a solo the Gallows Grove on one side, so I can rebuke the unit if they don't feign death, the knockdown feign death. And on the other side there was a well, and I did not drop solo for 2 turns, so I have the option to drop Gallows Grove to rebuke the other unit. So the game was very cagey, and in the middle, I think he blocked line of sight with his clouds, but because King of Nothings, he has no threat extension really, so the Clockatries do not threat the whole zone, and because I've threatened to teleport something into the clouds and dragged, he stayed just he towed the zone, and I towed the zone, and we were like staying there for a couple of turns. Because of that, it cost Dan a lot of clock to position his army, so he don't get into any of my threat ranges. And in the end, it comes down to him going for Last Chance Assassination. And because I've used Arcane Suppression entire game just to protect Kruger for assassination, the odds were really low, but he decided to try it anyway. He clocked during this assassination, but I really wanted to see the outcome of it, but it didn't work out. He needed 11s to hit, and if he boosts, that means he has not enough attacks to get through transfers. Really
Oh,
nice
right,
game.
okay.
And very good opponent. I think we had this round 4-1 again, with Marcin losing on tiebreakers, points killed by 6 or 8 army points, something like this. So he had a really close game.
Fair enough. All right. Well, that's nice. And I'm glad you got to see the Welsh guys and that they did so well this year. It's a bit like when you see Kuba happy. Like, it's just wonderful to see. Like, he's just such a happy dude. Well, the Welsh is just such a happy team.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Like, guys, if you're listening, I was really glad to play into your team, and I wish we could meet next year for a rematch.
Fantastic. So I'm not going to say much about round 4. We met Poland Centrum, so your other Polish team that were doing well this year, really well. And so my game was Wormwood against Zal 2. So I sort of took the slightly rougher matchup this time, and I played against Pavel, who was an incredibly great opponent to play against. We had a really solid game, and while it was a very tense game, I think we both tried to handle it the best we could, and he especially handled the tension in the game and in the room really, really well. So hats off to him. And he also, it was the only round that we lost. So we were down. It was 2-2. In the end, and me and Pavel's game was the final game, and I essentially made my biggest cock-up of the entire tournament. Sadly, of course, it was on stream, so if anyone wants to go and watch me making a fool of myself, feel free. But I managed to get his Ancestral Guardian early on in the game, and he only had 1, so his threat ranges were really reduced, and so I was able to sort of out-threat him, and so we ended up playing a very cagey game, where I'm just waiting for him to fee and then moving back, and waiting for him to come in and moving back, and playing very cagey. And because of this, Wormwood didn't really have much to do. I didn't want to trigger Vengeance. I didn't need to do much except for upkeep my forest and stuff. And so in that round, I just did all my usual activations, everything, move up, put some Fury out, blah, blah, blah. And then Wormwood would normally go last and do some stuff. But because he had nothing to do, I just sort of mentally forgot about it and didn't activate Wormwood. So therefore, Wormwood's sitting on too much Fury. And I suddenly realize after my turn that both of my beasts are going to Frenzy. Or at least Frenzy check. Fortunately, Getorix was just stood next to a Shifting Stone, complete random luck, but he was. Raptor, not so much. So I took the Fury that I could from Getorix and used Serenity to get rid of the other one. And then the Raptor needed to basically roll, I think he needed to roll 7- and I'd be okay, but he boxcarsed it, of course. And I frenzied my Raptor within range of his Supreme Guardian. So I basically lost my Storm Raptor for free. And Zal 2 is already a very difficult matchup. So playing a Storm Raptor down, it's very, very, very difficult to come back from there. I did try. I put in the best game that I could, but Pavel's a strong opponent. And as I say, playing with a Gargantuan down because of your own stupid mistakes is not a great feeling. So we ended up losing the round 2-3, and so we went out in the quarterfinals.
All right.
How was your round 5? Who did you meet, and how did it go?
So round 5 we met Norway Munin, so the winners of the WTC. And I must say the atmosphere was great in the room. We were joking a bunch. I don't remember even being didn't pay a lot attention to the matchup process, to the tables, because I was so occupied to just joke around with guys. Anyway, eventually I remember looking at our matchup grid, and I remember saying that if we lose the tables, we might really struggle in this round, because as I said, we run some simulations into things we expect and team compositions we expect, but Norwegian team was composed of things you wouldn't expect to see. So our matchups didn't look that good, and I felt like we need tables to skew some of those matchups, because you would expect Circle, Scorn, 1 mana with Harbinger, and here you had no Scorn, no Circle, 2 mana. So we lost the tables. Sfera, instantly, without a second, without a bit of a doubt, he said tables. So I was like, oh no. Yep. So we did our best. We got I think, two good matchups. One that was kind of 50-50ish, and two like 45% matchups or 40% matchups. So we knew that the game is going to be hard, but we have a chance to pull it off. I've played to Juan, who was playing Grimkins. He had Dreamer and the Child. And the game was streamed. I don't remember at the moment which table it was, so you need to find yourself, but it was the beach table, so it will be maybe easier to find on Twitch from the miniatures. Anyway, I got a table with no protection, there was no line of sight blocking terrain on this table at all. The scenario was anarchy, so that was at least good for me because Grimkins don't really like this scenario.
True.
But the terrain meant I was like, I was in danger the entire time. So I won the roll. I decided to go second. I decided to pick the side, and because there was no terrain, I knew that I'm going to be more cagey than I usually am, and I wanted to score on 7th last. And how Juan approached the game was something I have not seen before, which kind of makes sense to do, but just no one pulled it off against me before. So he moved his whole army towards the right zone, but he left 2 Gremlin Swarms and a Gorehound in the right zone. So he had few turns of contesting this zone, and he could just focus on pushing from the side. I was trying to stay outside of him. I would try to keep him at length to TK his stuff out. And at some point, I think I did not expect Cage Rager after my feed turn to go as far as he did. And he managed to put him in position to be able to Arcane Vortex one of my TKs. So he Arcane Vortex my TK, and I think that was a bit of turning point for the game. Fortunately, it was quite late in the game. He got an extra heavy that I did not expect to lose. So I think I've killed 2 heavies, then he killed 2 heavies, and because he has more heavies, I basically needed a turn to kill more 2 heavies, but lose only 1 to be able to grind the attrition. The game goes on, and I think I'm winning the scenario, and I'm starting to get ahead on clock as well. My moves were pretty quick. I was avoiding rolling dice. I was avoiding doing attacks. I've tried to play as cagey as I can. And then we go to the late game, and Juan is low on clock. I think he missed a shifting stone that I put into his zone to contest, and that was the nail in the coffin, because I was up 2 CPs, and he scored 1 instead of 2 in his turn. So I was up in CPs after his turn, and he had only one turn left because it was 6th turn. And in 7th turn, he had 1 minute. So he needed to basically do an impossible turn of removing 2 or 3 shifting stones and to slam a Wallward away of the zone and kill my objective, or to go for assassination. He went for assassination, but it was really hard to do in 1 minute. So when the clock starts to beep, he concedes.
Right.
So I had a great game, but unfortunately, the team lost 1-4. I was a bit disappointed, but really, I was also happy that we didn't lose 0-5.
Well, I mean, you know, when you lose against the winners, you don't always feel quite so bad about it. It's like, well,
not really. Especially that I love those guys, so I'm very happy for them.
Exactly, and also, you know, you still won your game, so you had extra reason to feel good. So that's cool. Yeah.
How about you?
Round 5, we met Belgium Van Eyck, I think, or Eck. I'm not sure pronunciation-wise. And I had the pleasure to play against Wout. We've never met across the table before, and so it was a real pleasure to be able to do so. And at this point, the pressure was off both of us. You know, neither of us were in contention for winning the tournament anymore. So we had a really relaxed game. You know, take backs allowed on both sides. You know, oh, be careful if you do that because I've got Hermit, or, you know, watch out for that, Simon, because blah blah blah. So we had some funny judge calls. We had a little bit of a sing-song. We mainly did the judge calls because we couldn't be bothered working out the deviations on the wells. And so we just thought we'd let them do it. Just, you know, it's more even. But I'm making it sound a little bit too casual. It was it was still a strong game, and I like to think we're both still fairly good circle players. And so it was my 4th circle mirror of the tournament up to that point. and I played Iona versus his Wormwood. There was a little bit of a list chicken type thing going on because he was hoping to drop his Baldur, I think. But sort of combinations of things like the fact that we were on Anarchy, the fact that the table was how it was, the fact that he knew I'm a quite conservative player when it comes to choice of caster. I tend to take the safe choice. And so he ended up just thinking, oh, sod it, I'll just take the safe choice and play a skill game, which is exactly what he did. So I actually managed to get ahead in this game. I think he would agree that I was definitely up in a little bit in clock and also in table position, I would say. Up until the last 10 minutes when I don't know whether I lost focus or whether Wout just turned it up to 11, but I just started to feel like I was being outplayed, and I was. So he showed his 7-0 Welsh Masters prowess and basically skilled it back, and he managed to cut me off from contesting. So it was similar to the game that I had against Robin in terms of like both trying to score on different sides and so on. But in this game, he completely cut me off from contesting. And so on the turn when he managed to do that, he scored on his turn as well as mine, and that allowed him to push forward for a 5-point scenario advantage. So really close game, was coming down pretty low on clock. And he skilled it out in the last stage, but an absolute pleasure, and what an absolute pleasure of a team as well. I think I can't remember if we won 4-1 or 3-2. I think it was 4-1. I could be making that up. But basically during our game, I already knew that we'd won the round. Maybe that had an impact. I might just be making excuses. Don't know. So in the end, lost against Wout in a circle mirror.
All right. So how many circle mirrors did you play?
5. I played 5 circle mirrors and 1 game into Zal. And I'll tell you, I'll take another circle mirror any day having to play that exalted shit. So round 6, and you are facing?
We are facing Wolfgang Omodamus Mozart, so Austria 1.
What a name.
Yeah. So I should probably explain my mindset going into this game. Like, we were really hyped for Poland in the finals. Like, really hyped. And then we lost the game in semifinals. So I was quite disappointed. Like, went quiet. And I think, like, I lost my fire. I didn't approach the matchup process, like, with tactics or anything. Like, I just wanted to play my game and have a good one. So we won the tables, I believe, and I got to play Daniel Snot Pavelka. I've played Daniel during the weekend at your place, I think 2 or 3 times, so I was happy to take him just because I've already played him. I knew he's a great guy, good sport. I knew that the game is going to be pleasant in this disappointed mind state of mine. So I was happy to play him. I approached the game and I see Gareth 1. I know that Gareth 1 is supposed to be Kruger answer, and it makes sense for me to drop Baldur 1 because Baldur 1 was good into both of his lists. His second list was a Virus 2, but I still wanted to see the Gareth 1, Kruger 2 game, so I dropped Kruger and he drops Gareth 1. I think I won the roll-off and chose the side because there was a building in an awkward spot on one side. So Daniel runs up, I move up, then he fits and runs a trident in front of Gareth. I was a bit confused what's going on. I think I've asked a lot of questions to Pavel because it's my first time playing into Gareth and I have no idea what he's doing. So I just confirmed that if I push Gareth with my feet, I could just do whatever I want because the aura is not as far as it would be if he stayed where he was behind the trident. So I push Gareth with my feet. I get trident basically for free. Daniel said that he didn't expect me to push him, and he misplaced Gareth. He should place him in front of his objective. So that was a bit of a brain fart. So I got a trident, and from this point on, the attrition game went south for him. I was removing a lot of pieces, losing a turn in his zone, but dominating the my zone, so the right zone on Recon 2. So at some point, there are 2 harpies and AFG left, and I have a lot of stuff that are moving towards his zone aggressively. And I'm going to auto-win on scenario next turn. So what I should do is run Kruger fuck away from his army. But instead I got greedy, and I think I started shooting some like a solo to get some army points, and I think I've missed him twice, so I used a lot of fury. I passed the clock, and basically Daniel has an assassination. We measure a lot of things, and in order for this assassination to work, he needs to roll 2 or 3 on gallows. It's hard to say because there was a rough terrain there. But he starts assassination, he rolls 1, and the assassination is off the table, so I win on scenario. Great game, and Daniel is a fantastic opponent, so I was happy to have such a nice last round.
Oh, fair enough. But I mean, like, as you say, like in the same way that like after our game where we'd gone out, we sort of were able to not relax. I mean, obviously we're still considering podium position, and we're really wanting to play our best game and so on and so forth. But like the pressure is off a little bit.
Yeah.
And so you're able to play games like that where you look to enjoy yourself, and especially as you say with players that you'd met before at the Villa and knew. I mean, I played against Daniel quite a few times, and they're always really entertaining games, and he's a lovely guy to play against. So that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Our round 6 was the other Germany team. So, I mean, I say the other, there were 3, but we met another Germany team, which is Germany, I don't know, Wildcows? I don't know.
No idea.
And so we played against them, and this was on Recon 2, as you mentioned. And I played into Bernhard Fischer, and he was sadly feeling really sick on this day. Like, he'd lost his voice almost completely. We had to he was sort of trying to limit his words really as much as he could, and I was like, the problem is I'm a really, really loud player. And he was like the quiet. I think it was the biggest disparity between like player volume I've ever seen. Because he was barely making a noise, and I was doing my usual laughing and joking and just shouting away. But in the end, we played my Iona into his Wormwood Bones, and the game was decided fairly early on. I started to push hard on the right side. I was running my Bridgerton Cowl and my Wolf Rider Champion so hard up his right flank, I was sort of getting towards his deployment zone. And a bunch of Ravagers sort of close behind. And so he sort of shifted everything over to his right to avoid this and sort of to use the central building to protect his stuff. But the result of that was that he went a little bit too far, and he went into my ambush range. And so my Bloodweavers with UA or with CA came in and basically cracked both units of his shifting stones and destroyed 1 sentry stone and 1 gallows grove. So he lost all shifting stones, 1 side of sentry stones, and 1 of his arc nodes.
All right.
While playing Wormwood Bones. So I sort of confirmed with him, so your threat ranges are now like 8 inches, 9 inches, and that's about it, right? Unless you get the hunter's mark off, and like he's over there, so he's, I'm out basically. He said, yeah. I was like, right. So I just put all of my Iona stuff ready to feet just outside of all of his threat ranges, and he had very little that he could do. He tried to engineer a board position that was workable for him, and eventually he went for an assassination onto Iona, but he hadn't realized that when you throw, he used a 2-handed throw to throw a Ravager at Iona, but he targeted Iona with the throw, and so when he missed, she was able to dodge. And then she dodged behind my objective, and so I couldn't be pulled very easily by anything, and I'd already sort of seen him plan out his whole assassination, so as soon as she dodged, I knew exactly where to dodge to avoid what he was going for. And I should mention, by the way, that in addition to all of that, his dice was some of the worst I've ever seen. He couldn't hit a boosted 6. It was dreadful, absolutely dreadful. So, especially when you're feeling sick and you're struggling as it is, like, you really don't need that. So that was my round 6. I think we did pretty well in that round. I can't remember the exact score, but we definitely won the round. And as a result, we finished in 3rd place due to SOS, followed by rounds games 1. I think we ended third on.
Yeah. My team ended 4th, so right behind you.
Yeah, with one less game 1 or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was second tiebreaker basically, with the same strength of schedule, and games 1 was one less. So
one less. Oh,
something we can't control. So you can't control your strength of schedule. Games 1 kinda could be controlled, but we did like the best we could. So anyway, 4th place is also good. We were hoping for double Poland in the podium, but like double Poland in top 4, it's still like something you don't see in WTC results. So I'm very happy. I think the selection process was a success, and you can't always be the best, but if you place solid, that means a lot for player, for your meta, for people around you. A lot of Polish players were cheering up, and I know that after WTC, if country does well, the meta kinda explodes, the meta grows up, and people start playing.
Yeah.
So
no, I think the English meta will certainly also benefit from that sort of thing. Like, we had some good results, we had some good teams going into the event. A lot of people were sort of putting a bit of pressure on us to do well, and I think that as you say, it does kick the local metas up a bit, which is really, really nice. Yeah. Right, sadly, guys, we've run out of time for today. We've got another call coming in with Christian to talk about his experience. So we'll end it here from us. But I hope that you enjoyed our content and our experience from the WTC. And if you're thinking about going and you haven't gone, then do put in the effort. Go for your international team. Go for it. Why not?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time on preparation, on selection, and everything around WTC, but it was well worth it. And I promise everyone, it's going to be time of your life.
Absolutely. All right, guys, take care.
Take care. Bye.